This episode brought to you by How to Write Manga, your complete guide to the secrets of Japanese comic book storytelling. Available wherever fine ebooks are sold.
The world has gone insane. Cosplayers rule the conventions. Gamers dominate the tabletop and the internet. Sci-fi subjugates the movies, and fantasy rules the bookstore with an iron fist. Only one group can bring order to this unruly mob. A team of uber geeks, masters of the nerdly arts, trained for decades in the hobby shops and basements of the nation. Mobilized by the secret masters, they are the Department of Nerdly Affairs.
Hello, operatives, and welcome to the Department of Nerdly Affairs. I'm your host, Rob Patterson, here with my co-host, Don Chisholm.
Yo.
And tonight, we're going indie, as in indie RPGs. We're going to explore the world of independent role-playing games. Not the big ones like Dungeons & Dragons that everyone knows about, but some of these smaller, less well-known ones. And who better to talk about that with than someone who's actually been a long-time player, researcher, and game designer with over 30 years of experience. I'd like you all to meet Graham MacLean. Welcome to the show, Graham.
Hey there.
So, Graham, what exactly defines an indie RPG, as far as you're concerned?
Indie RPGs, it's actually a vague and often contested title. The term that I'd like to focus on is creator-owned,
Okay.
but then Dungeons & Dragons was creator-owned at one point, so...
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
So that could be confusing. Okay. So there isn't really a proper term for them then. We just kind of use indie as a kind of generic label.
Yes.
Okay. So then what's considered to be the first indie RPG?
Dungeons & Dragons.
Okay. I guess that makes sense. When it was first published, it was published in, I believe, 3 small volumes, and
Yes.
would definitely have qualified for indie RPG status, at least based on its appearance.
And upon its distribution and production and everything else.
Right. Well, look at that bad game art.
Oh, yes.
Well, there's that, and I think right off the bat, you've hit on one of the difficulties for role-playing games as opposed to other types of arts and entertainment, is that there's such a stratification between, say, your A-list and your B-list. Because I know you mentioned distribution. A lot of, say, indie film and that is considered a small production, a very small team working on it, and it kind of has a short run that doesn't appear in that many theaters like the local art houses. But the thing for something like a role-playing game, you mentioned Dungeons & Dragons at the top, and they've sold millions of books. And then when you get to the next tier down, you're looking at, I know once upon a time, if a game sold 10,000 copies, that was considered a mega hit.
Yes. And if you're looking at the indie RPG scene nowadays, often games sell in the range of single digits to dozens of copies. And if it was a game that was a mega hit, a hit might sell 1,000 copies, and a mega hit might sell 2,000 or 3,000, but it's definitely much lower standards than, say, Dungeons & Dragons. But that's the same thing if you look at Dungeons & Dragons' original release. It took a while before it took off, too, so...
That's true. That's true. It didn't take off immediately. It was a kind of cult hit among the university crowd first, wasn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, and I think the original White Box, if I remember, they had, like, their run was only like a couple of 100 copies, wasn't it?
I don't know the exact number. You'd have to talk to John Peterson for that. But yeah, it sounds like a couple 100 copies to possibly 1,000 copies at most. Yeah, but it's very small.
Okay, so then at what point do we truly start differentiating between indie and mainstream? I mean, after D&D became mainstream, was everything else now independent? I mean, what point do RPGs kind of start to branch off? Can we truly say there's an indie line and there's a mainstream line?
Actually, the creator ownership is the reason why most indie RPGs prefer the term creator owner owned to indie.
Okay.
Because that differentiates between a company owning the game and the creator owning the game.
Right.
And it works better than indie and mainstream as a category.
Okay.
Because
so, would you rather we use the term creator-owned for the rest of this discussion then?
Not exactly, because it's easy enough to just say indie RPG and define it as creator-owned.
Okay.
But it's in the same way that indie RPGs have their own market, they have their own companies, and that creates a little bit confusion as well, because Bully Pulpit is producing games right now for the indie scene, but they're a company which is owned by Jason Morningstar and Stephen, I forgot what his last name, Segedy, and they're big in the indie scene as well, so it's not really an issue which has a clear line between them.
Right. I was going to say, yeah, a lot of indie publishers, even if they are just one person, they usually create a company to go with it. So it's hard to tell sometimes. And
that even goes as far as Evil Hat, which is producing a lot of indie RPGs, but it has bigger names to it, name games to it as well.
Okay.
Well, that's interesting too, because that's if you go back to the earlier days of gaming, there were a lot of companies that did that sort of thing. Like if you think something like, say, Palladium Books is presented as this big company, and nowadays it is. But originally it was just Kevin Siembita publishing his own stuff.
Yep.
True. Yeah, and so I guess technically almost every game company started out as this small creator-owned endeavor, didn't it? I mean, there's not many that didn't.
No, there's not many that didn't, but there are a few companies that started off as companies instead of companies run by designers. And I'm looking to... Cult was republished by an independent company as well as its own creators. So I can't tell you the names of companies that did that, but I was approached by Madhouse Productions, which collapsed before it published anything, and they wanted to get licensed to one of my games, and that would have been an example of a company that was hiring creators as opposed to being creators.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, there's a long history of that. The first company I can think of that was doing that kind of thing offhand, I think, was probably Fantasy Games Unlimited.
Yeah.
Back at the beginning of the 80s. I mean, I don't think Fantasy Games Unlimited produced any of their own games. I think it was all other people's stuff that they were basically printing or hiring people to do. I'm not sure which, actually. I don't know the whole story behind FGU.
It's very difficult because you may look into them and just find out that the names on the board were the original creators of the original games. Then they expanded the line, or they might not be.
Right. Well, I know that Fantasy Games Unlimited, at least, did actually have one person behind it. Like, there was one main person who was acting as the publisher, because when it eventually went, a bottom up, what happened is that he took all the rights to all the games with him and forced all the game creators to actually have to sue him to get the rights back.
Ooh, nasty.
Yeah, and it was even worse. What he was doing is he was actually republishing some of the games electronically once he could. And so he was publishing, in the internet age, he was publishing PDFs of them and then claiming they were still in print. So therefore, the game creators didn't deserve to have the copies back.
And that gets into intellectual property law, and different countries have different laws, and different contracts have different wordings, and that's I've explored that aspect of copyright, and it is a mess to get into. So,
I believe it. I believe it.
Yeah.
Okay, then. So, but if we're going to follow the whole indie mainstream line, what would technically the first true indie game be that became kind of a cult hit but never really gathered mainstream appeal?
Ooh, indie, but not mainstream. I don't know. It's because there's so much overlap between the terms indie and mainstream that you can have a creator-owned game that is mainstream, and mainstream in terms of role-playing games, because role-playing games is a niche market. So, yeah.
Okay, so that's actually a very difficult question to answer then. I mean, as you said, almost all the early games started out as creator-owned at some point, and then they shifted at some point to become a company or grow up.
I can point to games that have been mainstream and never had an indie status, but indie games that never that achieved success but never went mainstream is a lot rarer.
Right. Okay.
Now, the best example of that might be a couple of games here which are like Apocalypse World, which has indie status but is in the process of going mainstream, but it's still in production. So it might go mainstream. I don't know.
Because I would be tempted, I think, if I had to answer Rob's question. The first one that I would think of that kind of, I think people thought of as an indie game would be It Came from the Late 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 Show.
Okay. Yeah.
And I would say that, but I gotta add the caveat that I think indie game and cult game might overlap a bit, because it's one of those things that a small number of people participated in and are familiar with. People have heard of it, and and it has this like cadre of like hardcore fans.
Empire of the Petal Throne is much the same. It's sort of a creator-owned game which became owned by TSR eventually, but it never hit mainstream, but it has a cult following, and that's that there's a lot of overlap between the cult following, the indie game following, and the mainstream following. But yeah, whatever.
Yeah, right. Plus Empire of the Petal Throne, that's like what, the second, third, or fourth role-playing game ever, technically?
Yes.
Was that its own role-playing game? I thought that was just a setting for D&D.
Oh god, no. You had rules in the Empire of the Petal Throne which were based upon, they were based upon Dungeons and Dragons largely, but it was its own game.
Right. Okay, I can see that.
Yeah, it was. That's interesting too. Would it be for what considered an indie game? Would there be thematic differences compared to a mainstream game?
No. Whereas, like, especially nowadays, because indie game, yes and no. Indie games have the freedom to be a lot more wild than mainstream games. But there's an aspect of indie games called Heartbreakers, which are just rehashes of Dungeons and Dragons or some of the mainstream game. And that the advantage of being able to publish electronically is that you can put out a book of 300, 400, 500, even 1,000 pages of your own work for basically free, as long as you have an internet connection and a PDF creator. Now, the indie publishing sizes of those it's meant to be downloaded, and it probably won't ever get printed out. The indie games that are common nowadays are the shorter games, and the make for much thinner books and much different book sizes and things like that. So they have wild premises, or wild. They can also approach the mainstream premises, but the fact that they need to be published in print form restricts the price point, because no indie creator wants to throw the money around to produce a 1,000-page book.
Yeah.
I can see that. Well, do indie games tend to lend towards different rule sets or different approaches to gaming? Like, I mean, D&D kind of set the standard of you have your character, he has his stats, you roll their dice, etc. for role-playing games. But indie games tend to actually go in different directions, don't they?
Well, indie games, up until 2001-ish, indie games were very much along the same lines as mainstream games. You just had, worlds, fantasy worlds, or slightly modified versions of modern day life, and you had characters with stats and dice and things like that. But in 2001, Ron Edwards actually started the Forge community, which was originally based out of Hephaestus Forge, the website, but he then went on to start the Forge website proper, and which is still online, but it's maintained by Vincent Baker, who is also an indie game designer. And Ron Edwards promoted the concept of gamist, narrativist, and simulationist, which was 3 of the 4 subgenres of tabletop role-playing games.
Okay, can you explain them?
Well, gamist was any game that promoted competition. Narrativist, I'll get into narrativist a bit later. Simulationist was basically every game out there up until that point. The original Dungeons and Dragons was a bit gamist, but the most games out there which are have backgrounds to them and things like that are simulationist. And simulationist means that they're trying to create a world or a genre of a literary genre. Narrativist games, actually, I originally thought that it was about story, and that's not exactly what they're about. It's actually something much simpler than that. A narrativist game features a question that is answered through play. Now, the question needs to be open-ended, and it needs to be answerable with some sort of answer other than yes or no. So, for example, Vampire was a semi-narrativist game because it explored the concept of being corrupted by your vampireness.
Right.
Okay, and it was the big inspiration for Sorcerer, and which also explored the idea of corruption.
Right.
But it was one of the first narrativist indie games in existence. Now, narrativist has changed over time. So originally Ron Edwards described narrativist as including Over the Edge and things like that. Now, Over the Edge is not exactly a narrativist game anymore because the questions posed by the setting aren't worked into the rules.
Okay.
So to have a narrativist game, you have to have the rules represent the story or the story's question that you want to answer through the game.
Mm-hmm.
And
so the rules are channeling everything towards answering that question. That's what the rules serve to do.
Yes.
Okay. Can you give an example of this in actual play? How would this work?
Okay. Well, let's say, let's go with the game Dogs in the Vineyard.
Okay.
Dogs in the Vineyard is about a bunch of Mormon priests dealing out justice in the Old West, or in the Wild West, trying to clamp down on Satanism and magic and anything occult and ungodly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And it's got various aspects of faith in it, but it has no mechanic about faith specifically. So it's what's called a fruitful void in the rules. So it has, every mechanic it has is based on the use of faith or different aspects of the use of faith, but there's no faith stat per se.
Okay. So it's not like Call of Cthulhu where there's a sanity stat that you're keeping track of depending on the mental state of your character. This game has no actual faith stat itself, but everything else is kind of working around that idea anyway.
Yes. And if you shoot somebody for being Satanist, then manage to justify it later because he was a devil worshiper or a demon worshiper, then your faith might not be affected. But if you shoot somebody, the same person, and then worry about it later, then your faith is affected and you become less powerful or hampered in that way. And it's an interesting problem because there's no faith stat to modify. It's just role played out, but it has in-game effects.
Right. Okay, I can see that. So there's an actual in-game effect, but not a stat to go with it. All right.
Yes.
How are those in-game effects determined then? Do you gain like a little card or something like that? How is that put upon the player?
It modifies the traits. Like your character has a number of traits, and they can be good traits or bad traits. They're just traits. You could have blind as one of your traits and have to deal with the blindness, and that you could also have firearms as another trait, and those are equal value. Because they both create story rather than being an advantage and disadvantage. So, if you do something and something, you'll have your traits modified, and the exact value for the modifications can be determined by the game master, depending on what he or she desires to do. So subtract 1 from the character stats for the next conflict, take a new trait, rated 1d4 for the next conflict, change the dice of your character's relationships for the next conflict, have your character leave the scene and spend time alone, choose this if nobody else launches a follow-up conflict. It's a short-term fallout list. So it's actually a lot of GM decision making.
Right.
And that's the thing with Vincent Baker's games. He's big on GM decision making.
Right.
He was also the designer behind Apocalypse World.
It's interesting that you mention it's like the early 2000s that the truly narrativist stuff started, because a lot of the rules that you just described, it seems to kind of borrow from the live action role playing that kind of took off in the mid 90s. Do you think there's some kind of connection there?
Oh, definitely. I wouldn't discount any connection to the history at all. Sorcerer was being designed in 1995, and he didn't actually produce it till 2001. But it's it was inspired by the live action rules. It was inspired by vampire rules, and it's, progress is. We look at games like Fiasco now, which is very different from Dungeons and Dragons. But if you actually trace it through the history back to Dungeons and Dragons, it's actually occurred over a series of very, very short steps. And so to actually get to the point where a game like Fiasco, which is largely diceless, although the dice are rolled now and then, but it's when you describe a story in Fiasco, the dice are used to determine whether it goes well or bad based on the color you're handed, never rolled.
Right.
And you can trace that back to Dungeons and Dragons, where the dice are used all the time and they're rolled every time, but the colors of the dice don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And every step of the way, it's like, okay, yes, this is where that happened, that's where this happened, and this is where whatever happened. And it's actually very easy to trace it back all the way through Dungeons and Dragons and even beyond that.
So what you're saying is that aspects of indie games, even the modern ones, can still be traced back to the original role-playing games, even Dungeons and Dragons?
Yes.
All right, but what point do they truly start to differentiate from those lines? I mean, how do you demarcate them?
It's a lot easier to just put them into categories and demarcate those categories, but the categories themselves are very fuzzy. And it's, because their categories are genres, okay, or subgenres, or whatever you want to call them, super genres, are just fuzzy as hell. For example, people were arguing whether Once Upon a Time or The Extraordinary Adventures of Baron Munchausen, both games from the mid or early 90s, I think, or early to mid 90s, were proper role-playing games or not. And so Emily Kerr Boss actually came up with a new game to describe such games called story games. And story games included the category of role-playing games plus any other game which created a story as part of as part of play. There are fuzzy borders on that too. So Arabian Nights, the board game, you create a story as part of play. Well, but you're not acting out the story. You're just telling the story as is written. Is that a role-playing game or is that a story game? Are Choose Your Own Adventure books story games or not? I don't know. And that's where the reality, we try to put reality into these boxes, but it's a cultural thing.
Yeah, and I think too, because when you look at like say the live action game that took off in the 90s, you can see little bits even from like old school role playing games going that way. Because I can think two examples. Was the original Chill encouraged the game master to take player reactions in real life into account for their character, and when you got to something like even a game like Paranoia, one of the things for task resolution in the original Paranoia game is they suggested that if the player wanted to have their character do something like crazy and over the top, if everybody thought that was cool, if all the participants, the other players, game master, you'd let them do it, or you'd give them all kinds of bonuses. And that kind of led to the, I could see, not necessarily leading, but that idea later becomes the idea in like the live action stuff, where the game isn't necessarily a conflict of stats. It's like the participants are bidding story points against each other, and then whoever has the wittiest repartee or whoever comes up with the most entertaining idea tends to be the one that's victorious in that encounter.
And it even goes on beyond that, because Dog Eat Dog says, okay, you have to determine the game master who runs the colonialists who are oppressing the other players. You have to have a conversation about wealth, and that the richest player is always the game master, whether you like it or not. But it doesn't define wealth, so you can get into arguments over wealth.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, the richest player, as in the player who has the most money, is automatically the game master.
That's
not the character.
What it says. Yes, so the player who has the most money, but the player has to have the most wealth. And wealth is a very vague term. Does it take into account debt? Does it not take into account debt? Does it take into account property ownership? Does someone who owns a home, and what level of paying off their mortgage are they at? Whatever.
That's actually pretty cute. Okay.
1% the role-playing game.
Exactly. Wow. And you're the GM, so you make the rules.
Yeah.
Just like real life.
Well, that's interesting too, because to add to the vagary, I think when you look at like a lot of the more narrativist games, it seems like what's happening is they're actually simulation games, but you're simulating different things than most games would, or you're simulating things for the player more than you're simulating things for the character.
Yes. That's a pretty accurate description. Or both descriptions.
What's interesting take, and that would make me wonder, how important do you think paying mind to these distinctions is?
It is important as far as inspiring new ideas. So if we stuck with simulationist games and and just followed that, we could do that to the end of time. But because Ron Edwards was dissatisfied with simulationist games or trad games or whatever you want to call them, the term now in story games is trad. Then he came up with his own new categories, and the narrativist was an interesting enough thing that he decided to explore it more, and it's produced a lot of games, but it's produced a lot of debates and produced a lot of misunderstandings, and it's a messy field. So, it is what it is.
Yeah, I can kind of because I'm always kind of I'll say apprehensive about when it comes to any kind of like art or entertainment, especially the nerdly arts tend to be prone to this, I think. When you start having academic studies, I find it's a good thing to apply in hindsight, because if you want to see how did this come about, how do we get where we are, you have to have some kind of genealogy, and for that you need some kind of structure. But I find too often what'll happen is people who are moving forward, people who are creating new stuff, get way too wrapped around the axle about stuff like that. And
oh yes. Oh yes.
Because that's where and it becomes, there gets to be a hierarchy that this kind of, say for games, this kind of game is inherently superior to this one, when I don't think, especially for gaming, that's true, because it's all just a different kind of experience.
And Ron Edwards, as great a man, as a thinker as he was very prone to that sort of thinking. And, he's a university professor of biology at, I forget what university it used to be, Chicago, but I think now it's the University of Florida. But he got to saying that people that played the old types of games were brain damaged, which was just flat out not true. And it was something that he totally regretted a few weeks later, but the internet has a long memory, and it's still online. And the fact that it is online is something to do to his credit as well, because Vincent Baker and Ron Edwards have kept their sites and all their follows up, as well as their successes. So, yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, there's definitely a tendency to assume that whatever you like is the best thing ever. I mean, that's just human nature, right? Speaking of whatever you like, so why don't we diverge here a little bit? And why don't we start talking about some of the most interesting and unusual role-playing games, many of which I suspect will fall into the category of cult role-playing games of one kind or another. So let's try going in that direction for a little bit. So, okay. Graham, what are some of the most interesting role-playing games you've come across? Like some of the most unique and interesting indie games that most people won't have heard of before?
Doe Pilgrims of the Flying Temple is a perfect example. I am holding a copy of it right now. And
can you repeat, what's that called again?
Doe Pilgrims of the Flying Temple.
Doe, Pilgrims of the Flying Temple. Okay.
Yes.
And is that Doe spelled like D-O-H, like Homer? Or is it D-O-E, or how is that spelled?
D-O.
Just D-O, okay.
Yeah. Okay. And it refers to, well, it's a semi-Asian sort of game, but right. The temple is basically run by monks, and the characters are the teenagers who are sent on sort of a quest to explore the universe. And they're sent along with a bunch of letters of everyone asking for help. And they get into trouble with every letter. And
hold on a sec. So who is right? So these, okay, so they're given a bunch of letters of people who are asking the temple for help, and they're basically told, almost like guardian angels, go down and see if you can help out?
Yep.
Okay, got it. Okay.
And it's funny because it's very simple mechanics. Just draw some pebbles, black and white pebbles, and you get to determine you get to choose whether to keep the black of the pebbles or the white pebbles, and depending on which you take, you have to write a sentence detailing, or add a sentence to the story detailing whether or not your character gets into trouble, gets out of trouble, or whatever. So that's a very interesting game because it's got an education aspect to it as well as being a gamist game.
Yeah, that actually sounds like a really cool idea for a game. I like that one.
I also like Polaris, which is interesting because it has a system for conflict resolution, which almost never drops to dice. You can run a conflict for several minutes at a time with trading statements back and forth, and then only if, and it works out the right way, do you have to actually roll dice. That you can actually have, say that, okay, yes, I want to kill the demon, and the demon responds, but, it's, but you'll have to incur this penalty to kill me, and then, but no, I want to show off killing the demon, so that everyone's attraction, and then the demon responds, but some of them will fear you for it, and the players can choose to end it there, and the conflict is over, and no dice were involved.
Huh. So you're basically just negotiating.
Yes.
That's actually a good way to do it. Okay, I can see that. As long as everyone's willing to play by the rules and negotiate properly, that's fine.
Well, it's funny because Polaris feels very much like a religious ritual to play. And if you have everything set up right, then it just makes sense to play using the ritual phrases.
Interesting. And what kind of ritual phrases are they? out of curiosity? Like, what can you give me an example?
Sure. I think I got them here. Fuck. Okay, so long ago the people were dying at the end of the world, which starts the game. So if you want to enter conflict, if you want to enter conflict, you have to pose something. So if somebody wants to say, I want to kill the demon, and the person who plays the demon is okay with that, then the demon is killed. But if they are conflicting it, then they say, but only if, and then you suggest an additional thing. And furthermore, it shall not come to pass, which is the indication that dice are needed. You ask for too much, so that may happen if the demon is on a cliff and you're at the base of the cliff and you're trying to kill it with a sword.
Right.
You ask for too much because that doesn't make sense.
Okay. So the farther you push reality, the more likely it is that you might have to use dice, or the more you want to accomplish, or the more you want, the more you have to negotiate or risk using dice.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's interesting too, because I think what Rob is saying, the more you want to push reality as understood or perceived by the participants.
Yes.
I think that's kind of the interesting thing, because that's one of the for anybody out there who's never played a role-playing game, one of the things that I've always found is a trick is you've got a bunch of participants who are all trying to you're herding the cats in the same direction, and you need some system of making sure that everyone's on that same kind of page perception wise.
That's been a big part of the Forge debates. They've been trying to figure out shared reality or shared story. And they've got the most advanced system that I've ever come across for encouraging or analyzing players' actions and shared reality and things like that. But it takes 15 pages to explain in writing, so
Wow.
I won't even attempt to do that here.
Okay. So I assume that's for a GM-less game. Those are for games that involve the players either having a rotating GM or just no GM at all. Is that correct?
Actually, it's not for GM-less games. It can be applied to any game.
Okay.
GM-less games, or GM full is the more proper term, because there's certain roles that a GM plays. The plot doesn't advance without everyone's input. The NPCs or non-player characters have to be handled by somebody. Now, GM-less, often that job is handled by a different person every scene. But you can have games like Polaris which actually split up the NPC handling. So you have one person handling the villains, another person handling the bystanders, another person handling the bystanders, and another player handling the hero. And the two handlers of the bystanders, well, they took over the GM's role as arbiter of the rules as well, as opposed to the person who plays the villain. And that's an example of GM full play rather than GM play.
Right, okay, I can see that. Although, how do you determine who plays what role? I mean, in most games, as someone who gamed for many years, most of my players always wanted to be the hero. So how do you determine who the hero is in each scene?
It's okay. part of it is negotiation sometimes. Part of it is maybe seating order around the table. So Polaris, for example, whoever plays the hero for the scene, the person opposite him or her plays the villain, and the person to the other side of him or her play the bystander characters. Now, at the end of the scene, that order switches and a new person becomes the hero, but then everyone everyone gets assigned new jobs based on their seating position.
Right.
In relation to that player. So it's the funny thing is that the idea of a game-long or adventure-long game master is being replaced by a shifting rule. And in order to do that, you need a different mechanic than just game-long. So they decided to rest upon the idea of scenes. And a scene is not like a scene of theater. Usually it follows a single character. And it's just a subdivision of game session.
Okay. But who's determining the direction of the story then? I mean, just collectively everyone is?
Usually it is... Usually the player is pushing the story more than the game master, because the characters have their own desires and the game master is reacting to that.
That's true.
Now, there are certain situations where the game master has to push the story, or like Apocalypse World, the game master is in charge of pushing the plot along, but the characters can step in and advance their own goals. And if you actually look at it, it's a lot of managing conflict, because you have, in the original Dungeons and Dragons and many games thereafter, when you attempted to do something, you would roll dice. That gave way to, in the indie game scene, to conflict management. And conflict management actually grew out of games like Mekton and other games, which had opposed rules. Okay? And the fact that it wasn't always a direct matchup, so I wanted to beat you versus you wanted to beat me, yes, you could match it up. But I wanted to rescue the girl and steal her away from the scene, versus I want to smash your car and cause as much destruction as possible to the vehicle. Doesn't exactly match up, but that's what conflict resolution deals with. And so conflict resolution is largely based upon deciding what sorts of powers interact and interplay for the story. Now, there's another sort of resolution which is called scene resolution, which is the main mechanic of Fiasco. And it actually goes more abstract than that. So you have to describe how your things go well or poorly for your character based on the die given to you, or you choose. And it's very vague about dealing with conflict, because it assumes that you will just negotiate the conflict or create the most interesting answer. It doesn't always work out that way, but whatever.
So in a system like this, like the one you're talking about, the Polaris there, how can you have like 2 or 3 characters be active in a scene? Can a scene have 2 or 3 heroes?
Not usually. That's one of the big problems with Polaris. There's only one hero in any scene, and so there is only one person playing the hero. You can have multiple characters in the scene, but the others are bystanders.
Right.
And therefore the bystanders don't have any ability to engage in the conflict without the heroes or the villains' permission.
Right.
That's actually a rule in the game. And it's created lots of frustrations and problems, but I still love the game.
Okay. Okay. All right. So, any other role-playing games that you think stand out? Any that our listeners wouldn't have heard of before?
Ooh, well, Microscope was very interesting because it actually told non-linear stories. Microscope is a game, it's a story game, and it's not a role-playing game because you don't have control of your characters between the scenes. You may have control of the same character, but that's random. Or that's provided that nobody else chose that character.
Okay.
But it actually follows the story of culture, and it's, of course, from the beginning of the culture to the end of the culture, and thus spans vast amounts of time. And
okay.
And it actually then breaks it down to periods, events, and scenes, and you can play it for as long as you want or as short a time as you want. But yeah, it's very popular, and it's actually available from a local game store, but it's not usually available through stores. So actually, the indie games market is largely published and distributed through online stores. So RPG Now, indiegames.com, the Gaming Unstore, or the Unstore, yeah, and various creators' websites. So it's difficult to collect indie games, but because I'm already wired into the market, I just have to go to that creator's website, or have to figure out what the creator's website is if I hear of a game online, and then I purchase it.
So most of these games you're purchasing, are they PDFs, or are you getting like print-on-demand copies of them?
Because I prefer to get print-on-demand copies because I like paper over electronic books, but usually they're sold as PDFs. And PDFs are the cheaper way to purchase them.
Of course.
But, the indie game makers have to keep their tables covered with food, and they have to keep the roof over their head, and thus giving the extra few dollars for the printed copy is well worth the money, in my opinion.
Right, I can see that, but that leads to an interesting question. Are there any people that actually professionally, for their livelihood, make indie games?
The only person that I can think of off the top of my head is someone who actually went from mainstream to indiehood.
Okay.
His name is Robin D. Laws, and he's creator of Over the Edge and various other games. Where he used to work for Atlas Entertainment Games, AEG, and ever since then, he has moved to Pelgrane Press, which it's a little bit more indie-ish. Another person who has made that move, Robin D. Laws, lives in Toronto. So,
just like you.
Yes. Another person who has made the switch over is John Wick, who also used to work for Alderac Entertainment Group or Entertainment Games. And he is the man behind Legend of the Five Rings. And since then, he has been producing indie games almost exclusively. So he's produced Houses of the Blooded and Blood and Honor, and is generally producing some Shotgun Diaries, which I've never played or even read. But I do
like
own House of the Blooded. It's a zombie game.
Oh, okay. Well, that'll do it too.
Yeah.
Okay, so actually, Don, let's change and give Graham a break for a minute. So, what are some like indie or cult games that you think stand out? Because you've been playing for a long time too, and I'm sure you've come across a couple interesting ones.
I think probably pertaining to the type of stuff we're discussing here,
Mm-hmm.
2.5, because there's one that has a weird little bit that stick in mind for me is I like Cosmic Patrol,
Okay.
and it's closer to the storyteller kind of game. There's rules that are really stripped down.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting to note when you talk about conflict resolution,
Mm-hmm.
that game has a system for conflict escalation.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause
Okay.
what happens during play is you earn plot points, which are kind of like luck. I can spend one plot point and completely change everything in the scene.
Mm-hmm.
And you get them for being entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
And you could do stuff like if we're playing and your character's about to shoot the bad guy and you got them lined up, your dice are good to go. I could just drop a plot point and say, unfortunately, your gun jams. And then he'd look at me and go, what are you doing? Why are you being a dick? And like, we can drag it out. And it was interesting because you get that, you can have that back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, because again, that makes for a good story, weird twists.
Right, yeah.
And Cosmic Patrol has a following on the Forge community, so that speaks to its indie cred a little bit.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, and another one that I liked was I mentioned it was it came from the Late 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 Show.
Mm.
And what was interesting about that is your character is an actor who takes part in these bad movies. So what ends up happening is each adventure is like a movie, and one of your stats is fame. Fame works like experience in most games, that it goes up, and whoever has the highest fame is the lead. So if you're playing westerns, you'll be like the sheriff because your fame is higher, and this guy who's got like a low fame, he's going to be the Gabby Hayes character, and they really play on that idea that you're an actor, so you're running the game straight. They add different conventions based on the genre. So if you're playing a Western and you sing a Western song, your character, you can transverse any distance in one scene. Because in the old Westerns, that's how they would do, that was how they did a transition scene with a musical number.
Right.
And you can do other stuff, like based on your fame, you can have anachronistic equipment. So you get when you start the game, you get equipment based on the adventure, based on the genre. You'll get skills that your character might not have, the idea being that you get coaching before the game. If we're playing a Western and I have like a really high fame rating, I can take as anachronistic equipment, well, I have an assault rifle, so now the showdown with Black Bart gets a lot easier for me. And that made me laugh. And then another one that I liked was a Torg, because Torg, it was more of a mainstream game. It played like a mainstream game.
Right.
But the idea was that reality itself was under attack. And one thing they had was the drama deck, where you would get cards for doing different things during the game, and you could play them for different effects. And a lot of them were story-based. So there's like there's actually a long-lost relative card. So if we get captured by bad guys, I can play that, and one of them happens to be like my brother. We are separated when we were young. He recognizes me and helps us escape. And that was another one, because I think looking at the games that are considered indie, what a lot of them seem to do is you involve the player more than the character. And I think those ideas are fantastic for, even like, I'm an old school gamer kind of guy, but I like those ideas of that the game itself becomes a negotiation between participants, because then the participants themselves are active, where if you're just rolling, well, I'm going to climb, my climb is this, and you just drop a dice, see what happens. Well, the character is active, but the player really isn't.
Yep.
That's true.
And Torg's been brought up in a couple of threads on the Forge 2. So it's being recognized as being the most indie cred mainstream game out there. Actually, no, Cosmic Patrol, it definitely has more indie cred. But, yeah.
I think though, I think Cosmic Patrol, you'd have to, like, I would say that does come from the indie school of thought. Whereas,
Yes.
Torg was a big, it was mainstream. It was like a multimedia thing because they did novels. There was a comic book that all tied in. But it was such a strange game because the attitude behind it was different. And I think partly because it has an end. Like, it was designed from the beginning with an ending.
Which is a bit odd or self-defeating from a financial point of view.
Kind of.
But Vampire Vampire originally, when it started up, was the end, but it wasn't designed to have an end. They ended it because they had written too much into the setting, and it was just running out of steam. So, yeah.
In other words, they couldn't sell the players more crap, so therefore they had to reboot everything to make players buy all new stuff.
And then the reboot failed, and they brought back the old version, and so it's going through a cycle of nostalgia and things like that.
Well, yeah, I can see that. Games are like anything else, right? They're like any other kind of entertainment. They're subject to nostalgia of all kinds. Definitely. Let's see. So, I guess I'm a little different, as you both know. I tend to actually prefer... I'm a little wacky. I tend to prefer more, I guess you could say, solid games and less meta games.
So you're
overall.
less wacky.
You're right, actually. I actually am less wacky in that sense. Okay, never mind. So, for example, there's a game I was just talking with a friend about called Wushu. Are either of you familiar with it?
Yes.
It's basically kind of the martial
Wushu
arts...
or Wusha?
Wushu.
Wushu, yes.
Wushu is different.
Yep. Wushu.
At least I think it's called Wushu. It's a martial arts role-playing game that came out a number of years ago.
Yes, I'm familiar with it. Yep.
Like quite a few years ago.
Roughly the same time as Weapons of the Gods.
Yeah, I think that would be it. And one of the things... And my friend was like, well, this game should be right up your alley. This should be the most natural fit game for you. And I said, no, not really. Because when I play a game, I want the experience of going through the game and my character and I working our way through problems and solving things, rather than just dropping into meta. I'll give you an example. Wushu has an actual, I think it's an ability, okay, called Beat Up Mooks. Okay? And depending on what your score is with this game...
Which it stole from Shadowfest.
Okay. I think they were by the same writer, weren't they?
I think so, too.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But in any case, so depending on what your ability is, it just lets you basically just mow down minions just as a action, basically. It's like, yes, this round I'm going to take down 5 minions. And Dawn laughs because Dawn thinks, oh, that's kind of cool and cute and everything, because in martial arts movies, that's kind of how it works. But for me, I actually don't like that. I would rather take the time... I guess I'm a simulationist that way. I would rather take the time and mow down those minions. I would rather put the thought into it and say, okay, so I'm going to divide my action. I'm going to do this, this, and this. I'm going to put this into that. And okay, that's how I'm going to take down those minions. And I might succeed, I might not, but at least I've actually had to put some thought and action into it instead of saying, okay, I beat these 5 guys up. Like, to me, that almost defeats the purpose of the game. That's what I mean by I like a solid game. I like the detail, the nitty-gritty. I don't want to just go meta and say, yes, in a kung fu movie this happens, so therefore it happens.
See, that's where I would make the counter argument that putting a rule like that in, and for the D20 system, when they did the solid supplement, if you take the badass character class, that's one of their abilities too, that you just destroy X number of no-name dickweeds. But I would make the argument that, no, that's actually very simulationist, because that is a convention of the genre. That, you never, like when Bruce Lee or one of his many clones jumps into the middle of all the guys, there's never any doubt what's going to happen. It simulates the feel of the genre, as opposed maybe to the nuts and bolts of what within the genre is actually happening to let this occur.
Okay.
Which kind of goes in a little bit of a circle, but I kind of
I get the idea.
Get it. Yeah.
I get the idea of what you're saying, but at the same time, go Graham.
It's the difference between simulating a world and simulating a genre. They're both simulations, but genre is not reality.
Right.
And simulating world is not a particular genre. Although you could describe it as a genre if we decided to call simulating world a genre. But you're simulating a literary genre, and you'll never have perfect matchup with simulating a world, because a genre is not a full world.
That's true. I mean, that's where I guess you get into what would be called narrow games, right? Where basically you're creating a game and a rule set for that game that's for a particular, sometimes particular situation or a very particular story.
Yep.
And I know those have become popular in the last decade or so as well, is people creating narrow games for specific purposes.
And a perfect example is, The Mountain Witch. And it is a very, very narrow game. And Lady Blackbird is too, which is designed for a specific adventure. And has specific characters made for it. And once you're done the adventure, yes, you can go on to do other adventures, but you'd have to, there's no progression mechanic in it, or if there is a progression mechanic in it, it's very small. And it's meant to be played in a single afternoon, as is Fiasco, but the Fiasco is a little bit more open-ended in terms of story choices, and it definitely has no progression mechanic, because it ends very, very badly for every character.
Right. Okay. Kind of like Paranoia that way.
Yeah. What's interesting?
Paranoia, you can succeed, but I guess it's a little like Paranoia that way.
Well, yeah, except Paranoia, you theoretically can succeed, but no, they tell you in a Game Master section, step on them. So...
Yeah.
Well, there's another example of a fairly popular, quasi-mainstream, but independently minded game, Paranoia. I mean, think about the games that were coming out at that time, which were all very D&D-ish, and then you had Paranoia, which has a completely different mindset from everything else that was coming out at the time.
Yeah, it's true.
Great caustic in, and if you go back to the older versions of Paranoia, it's definitely more indie-minded. The later editions of Paranoia, it's gone mainstream. So,
okay, I could definitely see that.
Yeah.
So,
and
for me, sorry, Don.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, for Paranoia too, it's interesting because it blurs all of the lines about what we were just discussing, because the world and the genre are kind of all caught up in the same thing, and it's one of those games. It's hard to judge in any capacity because it really kind of is its own little thing way over here by itself.
Actually, maybe you better explain Paranoia to the audience, Don.
Well, the way they explain it in the rules is they say, picture the world of the future as written by Huxley, as written by I can't remember the name of the guy who did 1984. Orwell, and the Marx Brothers. That it's this post-apocalypse world. There was some great disaster. It changes from book to book. You play one of the citizens of Alpha Complex, which is this future dystopia post-apocalypse world run by a computer who's your friend. Computer's your friend. Remember that.
Computer is your friend. Yes.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's presented as wackiness, that everything's way out of sync. Nothing makes sense. There's like forms for everything. belonging to a secret society is treason, so of course everybody has to. Having mutant powers is treason, so of course everybody starts the game with them. And it's trying to navigate this world where everything hates you, basically. And it's also interesting because I have to say, growing up, the thing that taught me the most valuable lessons in life was that game. Because it teaches you how to deal with bureaucracy and how to deal with organizations and your fellow people. So maybe I just have a sad life. But yeah, it's a, again, I hazard to say comedy. Because it's a comedy in that it's like Shaun of the Dead. That it's funny
a dark
to
comedy.
us. Say again?
It's a dark comedy.
It is, but it's weird because I wouldn't necessarily just call it a comedy, because given that world, this is how it would play out, and it seems hilarious and ridiculous to us, but you don't have to kind of put a comedic slant on things given the way that world is set up. Like, that is what would happen. Which is hard to explain, and again, I don't think that's quite the a clear explanation, but I think
It'll do.
Yeah.
It'll give you the idea. Let's just say it's Dark Future, but it's not exactly Hunger Games, the role-playing game.
No, it's not.
I mean, you could play, perky young archers or something like that, and that would be okay too. Unfortunately, all the players would have killed each other by the end of the story.
Well, that's how it usually plays out, though, because...
Wait, that is the Hunger Games, I guess. Oh, well.
Yeah, see, and this is what I mean. It's its own little thing. You can't really prop it... But if anybody gets the chance, the first 2 editions were brilliant, and I highly suggest at least reading the books, if not playing.
I can see that.
And everyone gets killed multiple times.
Yep.
So you have clones.
You have clones that pop back up. You have extra lives. That's true. Now, are the clones in the game considered innocent when they pop back up? Or are they...
Yes.
Okay.
I think we both just gave the proper Paranoia answer. Yes, no, yes.
That's correct.
You are both people that have played Paranoia, apparently. Okay. Okay.
Because what happens is you earn treason points during the game, and when your new clone pops up, you're assumed to be basically, through an amazing coincidence, you've lived pretty much a parallel life, but as I recall, you roll to take a certain number of treason points off when the new guy... Otherwise, like, if you earn 10, you're a traitor and you get executed, usually by the group for the bonus points. Otherwise, every time you popped up, you'd still have 10 points and you'd just get executed. Although, we've done it that way, too.
Right.
So...
Wait, wouldn't that mean that one player's being hunted down by the rest of the group?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's kind of... The game encourages you to screw each other over.
Okay.
So...
I played a later edition of the game which actually had the death of the character wipe out the treason points. And it's funny because you knew the character was a traitor, but you had to just watch the character very closely to prove that he or she was the traitor that his previous clone was.
Right.
So, yeah. Characters went through, like, it's easy to lose all 6 of your clones in half an hour if you play the right way or the wrong way or whatever. I've also heard of a player getting through an entire adventure on his first clone, so, whatever.
So, in some ways then, it's starting to sound to me like indie gaming, or whatever, indie games, are almost a mindset. They're games or rules that are offering something different than what the mainstream role-playing game market offers. Is that correct? Would that make sense?
Yes.
So, any game, I mean, even, okay, so for example, then would a game like Castle Falkenstein then be an indie game?
No, because the mindset that you're talking of is actually out of the designer, not the players.
Oh, okay.
So the designer is like, okay, if we have a group of 5 people and one of them's game master or whatever, GM
Right.
involved, we're actually a group of 6 people, possibly more, because the missing player is the game designer. And the game designer can take a mindset of the indie games as we're describing them now and work that into the game. Now, if we as players choose to modify the game, then we could become effectively designers. So we can, say, play original 1973 or 74 edition Dungeons and Dragons, but then modify it to be indie game-ish by taking the player's reactions into account for every combat. And that would be player mindset, but that's the player acting as a designer.
Okay.
So what we're actually doing is mapping out the designer mindset of the mindset of the designers as opposed to the players. But the fact that we are often modifying games, and I think the research was done, which said that 80% of groups modify games. Actually, I think that's a little bit low. It's probably closer to 95% of the groups. Yeah. And that allows the individual groups to take on the mindset of, say, let's take the players into account. As opposed to just the game designer giving those rules explicitly.
Okay. That's interesting. So, speaking of that, so what kind of person is drawn to indie games? Like, what's the appeal of indie games?
They're cheap, they're small, they're fast. Now, there are certain sorts of indie games which are not small. OSR games can be small or big. Old school Renaissance is what OSR stands for. But usually indie game is cheap and small. And when I say cheap, it's probably going to be about $30 for the entire game. Possibly 60 with expansions, but they're only a single book, and they're fun. So and if you only want like a single night of entertainment for an entire group, $30 is pretty cheap. If you want multiple nights of entertainment, then you can pick up a game like Apocalypse World, and that will provide you with entertainment till the adventure runs out. And it's Apocalypse World will run multiple nights, and you only have to spend, I think Apocalypse World is about $35-40. See here. Monster Hearts, which I have, is actually $28, and it's a powered by the Apocalypse game. Which means that it runs on the base system as Apocalypse World.
Apocalypse World, right. So what makes the Apocalypse World system unique? Like, what's the major advantages or features of this system?
Apocalypse World has a long lineage of based on shock, social science fiction, and other games. But it managed to structure things and put things in language in such a way that it sold really well. And by sold really well, I mean the possibly thousands of games.
Oh, okay.
Which I know, it is one of the 2 big games out of the Forge community. Fiasco is the #1 game out of the Forge community, and Apocalypse World is second place.
Okay.
And it might have even hit 10,000, but whatever. Not that severe. Vincent Baker won't be able to retire on that money because that's
Right.
over 6 years. But it set out several things, and it has a game master position which says you can only declare things, but the players can contest the results. And that requires the game master to be very aggressive with the characters, but it details how to be aggressive with the characters and also be a fan of the characters and deal with the players at the same time. And the fact that it made that explicit and in the advice section, and it's about third chapter in the book, made it a groundbreaker for role-playing games. Whereas most games would save that for a Game Master advice book that may or may not be purchased later on. Apocalypse World actually advised that in the main rule book. And it actually started to give very game-specific advice, but the advice is usable by... some of the advice is usable in any game.
Okay. So, is it a GM full or GM-less game?
Despite what Vincent Baker claims, Apocalypse World is actually very difficult to play GM full in any way, shape, or form. Now, it has been converted to GM full status in the game Dream Askew, which is created by, I forget, but Avery, I forget her last name, but she also wrote, one second here, I'll check the McDonaldo. Avery McDonaldo actually took Apocalypse World mechanics and advice and combined them with her ideas of a queer community and created a game out of that mess. So a GM full game out of that mess. But it's an amazing game, but oh god, is it difficult to play if you've never if you've only played games like in Dungeons and Dragons.
Right. Okay, I can see that. Now, I know from talking to you that in your collection you actually have some Japanese games, that's correct?
Yes, I do, or I have a Japanese game.
You have a Japanese game.
Yeah.
Okay. So how are Japanese role-playing games different than Western role-playing games?
Japanese games tend not to have the multi-sided dice. They've only got D6s available. So they have to either use D6s extensively or they have to go some diceless method. The game that I have uses D6s and... it doesn't use D6s, it uses diceless. So you accumulate points over the game and you have to spend the points to do things. How many points you have to spend depend on your stats and things like that, but you get the drift. And it's a game about, it's Golden Sky Stories, which is used to be called Yuyake Koyake in Japanese, I think. I'm not sure about the pronunciation. It was created by Ryo Kimura, which you told me was actually probably an alias. And it's a game about making friends with various people. You're a bunch of spirit animals, basically little gods, and you have powers, but you are just making friends with the local villagers. And yeah, that's the only game I have. I do have Weapons of the Gods, which is based on a Chinese comic book, but is made by Americans and follows
Well, I was going to say it's by Americans, yeah.
Yeah, EOS Press was the publisher.
Yes, EOS Press. Weapons of the Gods is an amazing game. We mentioned it before on the podcast. Okay, so it sounds like that game that you got there, the Japanese one, it's almost like Yokai Watch, except it's the reverse. You're the players of the yokai instead of people catching them.
Yeah, and it's Golden Sky Stories, or Yoyake Koyake, is actually the Japanese equivalent of an indie game. So the Japanese games the mainstream games are like Dungeons and Dragons and various mecha-formed adaptations of them, and they're basically combat fests.
Right, yeah.
But Yoyake Koyake was Ryo-Kunya's attempt to fight against the combat mess and create the game of friendship. And it's funny because it's actually fun to play. I've played it several times and I look forward to playing it again.
Wow, okay, interesting. How did you actually get a hold of that thing?
I got a hold of it through Kickstarter, but it is available through game stores, or it's available through, it's available through one game store. Right. Here in Toronto for One Games. I don't know if here Tarantula carries it anymore or not. But it's available also online and therefore downloadable, and translated copies are available from online stores. I don't remember which store because I don't usually look for it on the online store once I have it in my collection.
That's okay. But if our audience actually searches for it, or I'll see if I can put a link in the show notes, basically where they can find it if they want to check it out.
Yeah,
okay,
and it's impressed enough people to actually get mentioned on the 401 Games webpage, which is actually a rather impressive feat. Because role-playing games are almost never mentioned on websites, but.
But that one actually made the cut. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Are there any other games you would recommend people check out? Any other more obscure games? If not, that's okay.
Kingdom is like Microscope except for nations, but it's a more advanced version of Microscope.
Wait, so in Kingdom, would the players individually be the leaders of said kingdoms, or are they representations of the kingdoms?
I don't know. I've got it, but I haven't played it yet.
Because that sounds to me like Hetalia, the role-playing game.
It is quite possibly Hetalia, the role-playing game.
For those listeners who aren't familiar, Hetalia is a Japanese manga, I think there's an anime version strip, where all the characters represent different nations during the World War II period.
Oh.
I believe it's during World War II period. And so all the characters, and so all their relations and the relationships are all based on the personalities of the countries and the connections the countries have with each other. It's very, very odd, but it's kind of amusing at the same time.
Okay, it is not that sort of game, although you could play Hetalia within the kingdom. It, like Microscope, spans vast periods of time. So from the rise of the kingdom to the end of the kingdom.
Right.
Which means may happen in a single generation, but probably not. So you follow a kingdom as opposed to a culture.
Okay. But why would someone want to play something like that, for example, as opposed to just booting up a copy of Sid Meier's Civilization on whatever machine of choice and playing out Civilization? I mean, what would the advantage to doing it this way be?
You get to tell a more robust story. You get to delve more into the culture of the kingdom. So whether or not the kingdom or the culture allows gay marriage or not might matter.
Okay.
Or it might not. You have to determine whether it does or not.
Right. Okay. sounds like it would take a very long time to play one of these games.
Usually, I've played Microscope. It can be played in 4 hours. Go Pilgrims of the Flying Temple the first game plays about an hour. Successive games, probably half an hour to an hour.
Okay, that I could see.
Apocalypse World.
Oh, sorry, go.
Apocalypse World takes several sessions. Polaris takes several sessions and has a beginning, the end, and an end, which is actually a common feature to many of these games. They've got beginning, middle, and ends, which makes them very different from other types of stories, like Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons is an open-ended system. It may have an end, but not necessarily designed into the system.
Right. Well, the GM is adding one, or the players are adding one, depending.
Yeah.
Okay, then. So, Graham, as someone who's been researching and playing and very involved with studying role-playing games and such, what do you think the future of role-playing games is?
They will always fade in and out of popularity. Because role-playing games are such a niche thing, board games and card games will always take the forefront, and collectible card games especially, because before Magic the Gathering, card games were sort of a secondary thing.
Right.
But board games have always held a position as fading in and out of practice, and card games now have hit that status. So it goes board games, something else, card games, something else, board games, something else, card games, something else. And the something else's could include war games, role-playing games, altered reality games. Video games are sort of a separate category, so it's not really into the mix. Live-action role-playing, yeah. Okay. And I'm interested in researching the indie role-playing game scene, and it's funny because most researchers of analog games are into role-playing games and variations thereof. So live-action role-playing games and role-playing games.
Right.
But academics are not going with the most popular games, which is, board games like chess, Go, and even like other games like Axis and Allies and things like that. So, yeah.
Okay.
So that's the future for role-playing in my head, because it will likely retain some value, and because it's a chance to get together with your friends and tell a story together. And once that's started, it's very difficult to wipe that out from the culture.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's more social than computer games or networked games even. But it's always a niche market.
Right. Okay. So gaming and role-playing games are just going to always be niche. There's not really going to be another breakout of them. Well, I mean, not pen and paper versions anyway.
It's actually, okay, the original Dungeons & Dragons breakout only happened because there was controversy surrounding Dungeons & Dragons.
Okay.
And you talked about that in your previous podcast. Unless that happens with people being told that role-playing games are bad in the future, which I really can't predict that happening, then they will remain a niche market. But if that happens again, well, I don't know.
All bets are off.
Yeah.
So I guess that's our plot, guys. We have to get together and convince the world that role-playing games are evil and corrupting society. That's the last best hope for role-playing games.
And the thought that that's the last best hope just fills me with dread.
Yep. Well, of it ever being mainstream. But again, that's pen and paper. Role-playing games are actually about to take off in the hugest way possible. After all, we're on the edge of a virtuality revolution. And once that kicks in, everybody's going to be playing role-playing games all the time. Yes, they're going to involve like shooting stuff or having sex, but the thing is that they're going to be role-playing games, right? People are going to be playing all kinds of games constantly. The whole society is going to be inundated with them. They just will happen on computer-generated worlds instead of in people's imaginations.
Actually, those are not role-playing games per se, what you're talking about. Those are altered reality games. Because if you're talking about the Google Glass, wherein...
Actually, I'm talking more about like the HTC Vive and the Oculus Rift. You're right. If we're talking about augmented reality, like say Pokemon Go, that would be an altered reality game, wouldn't it?
Alternate reality game. Altered reality. Yeah, altered reality works in there. There's another word for A and ARG, which denotes a different type of game which doesn't require a computer, but the semantics of those level of differentiations is just lost to me.
Okay. So anyway, my point is that I would say that the games they're playing on the Oculus Rift or the next generations of those types of like headset and haptic control and everything, that stuff's going to be role-playing games where they're going around and experiencing worlds of one form or another. They might be just the next level of World of Warcraft, but they're still going to be basic role-playing games.
Yeah, but it's not quite the same to tell a story and to actually live a story. Have to live a story, because you're the hero in your own story. And to actually have to acknowledge other people that you're playing with, that's the strength of role-playing games. It's the social aspect of it, rather than the story aspect or the play aspect of it.
Right.
It's just actually getting together with a bunch of friends and sitting down it's an excuse to get together rather than an excuse to play.
Right. Well, it acts as a social experience, right?
Yeah.
In theory, getting together with a group of friends, putting on virtual reality helmets and running around together in a dungeon is also still a social experience. It's just a tiny bit different one.
And it's every level of media that you have separating you from reality is going to cut out some level of expression.
That's true.
So the technology is going to have to get a lot more advanced before it captures the full body and gives feedback to the full body the way that we actually need to communicate and voice and things like that. So you need to have both massive amounts of output and massive amounts of input on everybody's computer. And I don't see that happening anytime soon. Although who knows, I might be wrong.
For the level you're talking, I don't think you're wrong. It's going to take time, although I would measure it in decades at most.
I think you guys are kind of both going the wrong direction.
Well, screw you.
Correct.
Okay, why?
Well, because I think when you talk about like augmented reality, altered reality, virtual reality, becoming the next generation of role-playing, I think what you have to have happen has nothing to do with the technology. What you need to have happen, which I think the big companies are going to stomp on, which is the true stumbling block, is the ability for the participants to somehow add to the reality everyone's partaking of.
That is a very key point. Good point, Don, because that is the basic difference between computer role-playing games and tabletop role-playing games, is that computer role-playing games are created by the game designers, and yes, the people may be allowed to create buildings and the world in general architecturally, but they don't get to add to the world, make the world in general.
Hold on a sec. That's not always true. There was a game that was middling popular for a while there, a massively multiplayer game called Second Life. And on Second Life, it was pretty much an open sandbox where people just did whatever they wanted, and they created huge structures, they created communities, they created all sorts of stuff.
But compare that to explaining the subtleties of communication. So if I say I yell at somebody, then a role-playing game, you yell at you describe it, but you don't actually yell at the person. Whereas, I suppose you could yell at someone, but
I always yell at people, but that's just me.
Yeah, but Second Life didn't have that element of communication because it's you could create buildings, and that's why I mentioned the architecture thing, because Second Life allowed the creation of buildings. But to actually create a culture, to design a culture, to design a language, to design a slang. Well, you can design slang in Second Life, but you actually have to have people supporting the idea of slang and that particular slang. And it's far easier, far less resources to create a slang system naturally out of role-playing games than it is to actually get a group of people and actually get them using the slang properly in a computer role-playing game.
Yeah, I could see it. Because I would think Second Life I would consider to be one of those gray areas because it's very similar to like a role-playing game, like the kind of things you can do in a tabletop role-playing game. But the scope and the scale of the participants I find is kind of a limiting factor because you're not getting, it's more like texting, you're not getting actual exchange. It's close, but because it's diffused throughout the populace, as it were, it's not quite the same. And I think it's also got the problem, the way I explain what makes a role-playing game, especially a tabletop one, different from a video game or a video role-playing game would be if we're playing World of Warcraft, we can't say, screw it, let's just start a hot dog wagon, because there's no provision for that in the game. Now, if we're playing D&D, we could totally stop and start a hot dog wagon, because I've had groups do things like that, because there's still the game, the rules, no matter how detailed they are facilitating the imaginations of the participants. And if we can go as beyond them as we want, we can limit ourselves to them as we want, but there's always that option where even the most sophisticated video game, you can still only do the things that the game is designed to do.
Yeah.
That's true.
And
I
thus
see your point.
You can't boil water in Second Life.
Until somebody comes up with the patch that lets you do that.
Right.
Because it's similar to what you can do in a role-playing game, but it still skews more away from it, because in a role-playing game, we can just come up with stuff like that on the fly, and all the participants have a hand in it, and here's our new rule for boiling water, and everybody's like, oh, I came up with the idea of it doing 5d6 damage, and blah, blah, blah. And it's a similar experience, but I do think that there's a difference.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay. I can see your point. I concede. Well, I concede that it's different for now.
Yeah.
I do think that eventually things are going to change, though. I mean, there will come a point where players will literally be using virtual reality sandbox technology to create whole worlds as though they are gods. And then other people will be able to enter these worlds and play in them. And that'll probably be a big thing, maybe 20, 30 years in the future.
Not even that
It's
far.
probably going to take a little bit longer than that.
Well, it'll depend on technology and depend on a few advancements, that's true. But the key point is that probably will happen at some point. Version of it happened with MMORPGs. That's kind of what Second Life was an attempt at. And I think that will continue in the future. Who knows? Maybe we're in such a simulation right now. Actually, we're actually living in someone's simulation from a sufficiently advanced society.
Someone who hates me, apparently.
Well, there is that. Unless that person was a masochist, in which case maybe they are you.
Be thankful, though. You've got your roof over your head, you've got your job, your food on your table. A lot of people live with way, way less than that. So
Very true.
it's every time I start thinking that way, it's like, oh, yeah. And I pull up my copy of Dog Eat Dog, and it's like, oh, right. These people have it worse.
Well, and that's something good. I mean, role-playing games, whether indie role-playing games or normal ones, or more traditional ones, can teach us about life, and they can remind us about life sometimes. Like any other form of entertainment, they can be educational, and they can be beneficial for us in many different ways. And on that note, I think we should probably bring this particular session to a close. Graham, any final thoughts you want to express before we go?
Indie games are not the monsters everyone makes them out to be. They're not this strangeness that everyone makes them out to be. But if you are used to playing other role-playing games, then playing an indie game is very difficult. Okay? If you have never role-played before, then playing an indie game is the most joyous experience ever. And I've run games for players like this, and I've run games for players who played before. And the players who had never played anything before, they got right into it. The players who had the preconceptions and who had played other role-playing games before, they were stumbling left, right, and center. And by the end of the game, they got it, but it was about half an hour before the the non-indie game player or the non-experienced role player got it, and 3 hours before the experienced role players got it. So
it's a different mindset, right? You're having to completely shift gears.
And if you were coming with expectations, then that will only hamper you in playing indie games.
Interesting. So that's something to keep in mind. Keep an open mind. Okay.
Yeah.
Don, any final thoughts?
I think the biggest thing to remember, like I've said before for a lot of different things, is don't get wrapped around the axle about terms and categories. Always try something different. Try something new. If you've heard like some weird little indie game that there's some buzz, give it a shot. Because even if you're an old school, I want my 1,000 pages of charts, what's my armor class role player, the nice thing about the indie games is they offer different ways of doing things, and you can almost always find something that you can add to whatever other kinds of games you're already playing.
That's true.
Good.
And they might give you a new perspective in your normal role-playing. Even if you're a Dungeons and Dragons player, playing an indie game might actually give you a new idea of how to play Dungeons and Dragons in a more enjoyable way, or how to get more out of your more traditional mainstream role-playing. So it's always worth trying out indie games and seeking them out, just because you might like them and you might learn something.
Or you might not like them, but you might learn something anyways.
That's entirely possible.
Yep.
And on that note, thanks everyone for listening. Please tune in next time. We'll be talking about something really interesting that you're absolutely going to love, and you'll find out about it on the next episode of the Department of Nerdly Affairs.
Star Wars Holiday Special cosplay.
Good night, folks. Bye.
I got one in.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you'd like to hear more or join the conversation, come visit us at obeythedna.com. You can also find us on iTunes or whatever fine podcast site forgot to lock their back door. So until next time, remember that to master the nerdly arts takes time, practice, and enough Coca-Cola to drop a rhino. See ya! Come on over and join the conversation at obeythedna.com, where you will find show notes and more.